Trump on supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine sort of made a decision. We'll talk about this with Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD. Julian, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Julian, yes, President Donald Trump said he had decided to supply Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles. He said this is in a White House broadcast, but he added that he would like to know what exactly these missiles will be used for and where Ukraine will send them, as he does not want escalation. What specific conditions or assurances does President Trump expect from Ukraine regarding the use and targeting of Tomahawk missiles?
Yes, first, I would say that he said he has made sort of a decision, and this decision is that he wants to know what they are used for. So he didn't say that any decision was made in favor or against Tomahawk missiles. So I think that's the first thing which is important to know. So we don't have a yes or no yet. The second thing is you were asking about these guarantees or these information he would like to gather. I think we have heard the same from the Biden administration, unfortunately, before. You remember that they supplied first HIMARS, then ATACMS missiles to Ukraine, and they always wanted to be informed about where these missiles would be used. I think this is a pattern of American presidents, unfortunately, which remains, which is not new, I would say. And as far as I'm informed, you remember when there was a big Russian column attacked in Kursk, I think in August or September last year. I think the US administration was not happy with this, and this was one of the last times we have seen this. I think we've seen another attack on these North Koreans, I think these commando structures there, but this was the only one. So altogether, what I want to say is that all American administrations since the war started have been very reluctant in just giving Ukraine a free hand when it comes to using these cruise missiles in this case. And of course, with Tomahawk, you have a much bigger chance that something will be hit, which is not in the interest of the United States because they have such a big range. I think it's 2,000 kilometers around, something like this. So you could hit basically everything that Ukraine has hit so far with drones, with Tomahawks. And I think this is, of course, what the US sees as a risk, because there are some nuclear installations, for example, when it comes to strategic forces, when it comes to strategic warning systems of the Russian Federation, where we have seen very individual and very isolated attacks from Ukraine in the past. And I think there was some backlash from this from the American side, because they don't want, for example, to be Russia to become blind against nuclear missiles, because in this case, what the Russian doctrine says is that they should use these nuclear missiles. So I think, yes, first, there's no decision so far. And second, of course, the Americans want to control where Ukraine uses them. I think that's where we are right now.
Julian, we're waiting not only for Tomahawk missiles, but for Taurus. What is Germany's official position on the possible transfer of Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine? Has the German government been consulted by the United States regarding a potential transfer? And if so, what was the nature of that consultation, in your opinion?
Well, according to my information, every attempt to supply Taurus to Ukraine was stopped. I mean, we just had a verbal confirmation from the Chancellor before he got Chancellor that he will supply these cruise missiles to Ukraine. And as far as I'm informed, all these processes have been stopped. Instead, we have the German way now, which means supplying, funding to the Ukrainian arms industry to then build different sorts of distance weapons, which are mainly drones, as far as I know, and some very light cruise missiles to then be used in Russia against Russian targets. So, unfortunately, yes, we had a turn there of the Friedrich Merz, who, when he was in the opposition, said he would supply Taurus, and as soon as he turned Chancellor, he was first, I think, speaking about strategic ambiguity, which means you're not telling your enemy what you're doing. But then we had many ministers and also people in the government parties which openly said we will not supply these to Ukraine because it would be, as they said, too dangerous. And we also have to say that now that we are in a stage where Ukraine is able to attack 1,000, 2,000 kilometers away from its border, I think also Taurus is not that important anymore because of its very limited range on the one side, and because we have other systems, Ukrainian systems, which are replacing this. But unfortunately, yes, of course, Taurus would be always a good weapon because every new weapon, every strong cruise missile would be good to use against Russia. But from what I know, there's no American consultations. There's just a decision of the German government to not supply them.
About what is happening in Russia, the Sverdlov plant is not only Russia's largest producer of explosive compounds used to fill all types of munition, from artillery shells to ballistic missiles, but also the country's sole manufacturer of octagon and hexagon. The plant sits near Dzerzhinsk in Nizhny Novgorod region, roughly 750 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. And how critical is the Sverdlov plant to Russia's overall munitions manufacturing supply chain? About what is happening here?
Well, I think over the past couple of months, we have seen more and more strategic strikes from Ukrainian long-range drones, including refineries, as you know, including power plants recently in Belgorod and Bryansk oblasts, and also in some gunpowder factories. What we have shown right now, and this is also what I've seen, was unfortunately successful Russian interceptions of Ukrainian drones. You have seen these explosions in the air. I think if this factory would have been hit, there would have been a big fire, a big explosion visible from the town area. Still, I think it's important that Ukraine tries to hit these strategic targets as far away as possible. And also, as you heard Mr. Zelensky yesterday, there is a new strategy. So Mr. Zelensky clearly said that from now on, the Russians have to feel what's happening there. He said that not only from a moral point of view, but also from a physical point of view, the Russians have to feel what it means to live without energy, without fuel, without heating, without all these things. And that's why I think the Ukrainian strategy is shifting there. It's more going into the, let's say, wider population, paying back with the same methods Russia is using. Mr. Zelensky said also, we are not killing civilians at the same time. But of course, I mean, everyone knows that if you attack a power plant, the suffering for the civilian population is increased. Of course, if you think of hospitals, I mean, you have all this in Ukraine. Russia is doing all this terrorism for 3 years. And I think he is very much aware of this, that Ukraine tries to increase pressure on the Russian government by increasing the suffering for the Russian population. And that's a strategy, we have to see if this works. I mean, it didn't really work with Ukraine, right? Over the last 3 years, there has been so much suffering, and still the majority, Ukraine is united in its fight, united in its defense. You cannot see many political opponents telling Mr. Zelensky to stop fighting because millions were living without heating for many months. So we will see if this really works. I think Ukraine has the weapons at hand right now, which it didn't have over the past 3 years. And that's why, of course, the strategy is shifting because you have new tools. And that's why not just hitting military targets, but also hitting critical targets, which then could increase the pressure on the regime in Moscow, is vital to the Ukrainian defense strategy.
Bilan, Ukrainian long-range drones appear to have set a new distance record by successfully striking on oil refinery in Tyumen, located almost exactly 2,000 kilometers from the current front line. According to available reports, several drones reached Tyumen itself, with at least one explosion recorded on the refinery's territory. However, the strike does not appear to have targeted the refinery's primary oil processing units, and no large-scale fire followed. But how significant is this strike in terms of extending the reach of Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities?
Yes, I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, the further you can strike, the further Russians have to stretch their air defense, which is really important. So they cannot concentrate them on certain points, but they have to make effort also, as you said, 2,000 kilometers away from the front line. We have seen a Ukrainian drone hitting the refinery in Orsk, I think, close to the Kazakh border near Omsk some days ago. And this is, absolutely critical. You could see that there also you only had, let's say, light air defense. I didn't see any missiles. I just heard heavy machine guns, and the workers there in Omsk were just watching and were just watching the Ukrainian drone hitting the refinery. So yes, I think it's absolutely crucial that Ukraine extends these strikes, that Ukraine shows that it can strike as far as possible, of course, from its own border, because then the Russians have this uncertainty, like where are we getting hit next? Where do we put our air defenses? Where do we locate our production? I mean, fuel production, weapons production, drone production. You were talking about this before. So yes, everything Ukraine can do in terms of increasing the range and the scope of these attacks. I mean, again, we are hearing of many Ukrainian attacks, but if the Ukrainian numbers of the launched drones are correct, then Russia is successfully intercepting 95% of them, if this is correct. I think the numbers are a little bit exaggerated, and I think it's not 100 or 200 drones being launched per night and then only 3 or 5 hitting the enemies. I think it's only a couple of drones and maybe a couple of dozens, and I think the Russian air defense is much less efficient than we think if we take these numbers into account. So from what I see, the Russians are maybe shooting down 50% of Ukrainian drones, not more.
Bilan, about battlefield, on the battlefield, intense fighting continues and Ukrainian units are repelling concentrated attacks. Ukrainian defenders have repelled 193 Russian assaults on the contact line in the past 24 hours, with 59 Russian attacks being repelled on the Pokrovsk front alone. In addition, Ukrainian defenders repelled 22 Russian assaults on the Novopavlivka front. How significant is the concentration of 59 Russian attacks on the Pokrovsk front in terms of operational priorities for both sides? And here, your analysis.
Yes, I mean, the focus of the Russians is still Pokrovsk. It's absolutely clear the Russians are attacking, which is, by the way, very unsmart in military sense. The Russians are attacking where the Ukrainians are strongest. Normally, you always look for weak points, like the Ukrainians did in Kursk last year. But the Russians are keen in taking Konstantinivka, Mirnograd, and Pokrovsk, which are all very nearby, because if they take them, it will be an absolute assault from the south on Kramatorsk and Slavyansk area. So I think this is what they are trying there to secure this area. Well, Ukraine is defending there, I would say, very well. I saw yesterday new pictures from Röpcke, which is a little village there north of Pokrovsk, and I have counted myself on some square meters 45 dead Russians. So it's really a lot. I think the Russians are suffering there a lot. You can see that in this area they are using horses now. I mean, it's really going back from infantry fighting vehicles to Ladas, to quads, to motorbikes, and then to horses right now to help the logistics. I think it's a death zone. It's a killing fields for the Russian soldiers there. And well, if they are under the impression that they have to send more soldiers into death in this area, then, well, I think it's not the worst thing for Ukraine to happen. On the other side, you were talking also about the Novopavlivka front line. I think there it is very crucial that Ukraine uses more forces. Unfortunately, it needs more drones, it needs more forces, because Russia has so far captured at least 11 villages in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Sosnivka, I think, was one that was liberated or recaptured recently by Ukraine. Verbove is another one where you have both sides having half of the village. At least the Russians were stopped there when they tried to have their another flag stunt. So I think that's very important, because if you're successfully defending Pokrovsk area and this front, and at the same time you're losing, let's say, 2 kilometers per day in the Novopavlivka area, I think that's not very good. So that's why it's important for Ukraine to keep the pressure on all front lines, to stop the Russians at all front lines. And so far it's happening, which is very good. Yeah, you're showing there this map. Unfortunately, the Russians are back in Pokrovsk. We can see this on this map, and we have also seen this in some Ukrainian footage recently. They are in 2 areas. They entered the town and tried to gain a foothold there. So far, all of their assaults could be repelled, which means they were there for some days, also in the higher buildings, and then they were driven back by the Ukrainian army, which is very good. Let's hope that this continues and they cannot have a real foothold in Pokrovsk, because this would be the beginning of the end, as we have seen in so many Ukrainian towns. Because if the Russians are in the town, they use every basement, they use every possibility to hide underground and attack in the night and so on. And I think we have seen this very much. So as long as they're in the open, like I have talked about Novotoretsk, this is the killing fields. When they are in the towns, they have almost the same possibilities to hide and move forward like the Ukrainian defenders. And this is something the Ukraine shouldn't let them do.
Bilan, Russian troops made an unsuccessful attempt to break through to the town of Konstantinivka, taking advantage of deteriorating weather conditions. In the attack, the enemy used heavy armored vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and MTLBs. According to Ukrainian units, the attack was halted by joint actions of the defense forces. In particular, the Phoenix unit launched a series of FPV drone strikes on enemy equipment at the stage of assault group formation. How effective is the current Ukrainian defense in countering attacks supported by tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers? And what do you think about situation near Konstantinivka?
Yeah. Well, I have just been near the front line recently, being with FPV drones as well as with ISR reconnaissance drones units from the Ukrainian armed forces. And it's very, very hard for them to operate in bad weather. Unfortunately, we have to say this. Everyone knows this. The Ukrainian soldiers know this, that if there are low clouds, if there's rainy weather, if there's snow, the ISR cannot work. And you see the Russians much later approaching your area, approaching the defense lines than if you had good weather. So, of course, the Russians are using this. I think the Russians are having tanks. Absolutely, they are still having tanks. They're just not using them in normal life because they know in good weather they have no chance. They will use all armored vehicles and, they will be rolling coffins for the soldiers. So, yes, exactly as the Ukrainian army is saying, they're waiting for bad weather. They're trying to advance when the Ukrainians are more or less blind, or at least blinded by the weather. Fortunately, in this case, the FPV drones were working last minute. I mean, it was really last minute. The tanks were close by. They were already on the real streets going to Konstantinivka. And I really hope that all Russians were stopped there before reaching. We know that the Russians are in the Dachas. You could just see this on this map. On the Dachas southeast of Konstantinivka, it's only, I think, 2 kilometers to the real the area which is more urban there in Konstantinivka. So it's important to stop them there. Exactly. So yes, when the Russians see a chance, they use their armored fighting vehicles. They have them, of course. They have them behind the front line. It's not like they totally disappeared. They just don't use them anymore. So it is very important that these units are working, that the Ukrainians are working there. And let's hope that the winter will not bring the conditions for the Russians to use bigger assault units again. We have not seen, let's say, 10 or 20 armored vehicles for a couple of months now in one assault. So let's hope it stays like this.
Bilan, from October to December, Moscow will conscript another 135,000 men, expanding recruitment amid mounting pressure on its military machine. On September 29, 2025, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin initiated the military conscriptions order for 135,000 men. The annual autumn Russian conscription began on October 1st and runs until December 31st, 2025 across Russia and the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. How will this wave of conscription impact the overall size, structure, and readiness of Russia's armed forces?
Yeah, well, this remains to be seen. I mean, we have seen several conscription waves from the Russians over the past years since the war started. And interestingly, 90% of these conscripts have not been used in the war in Ukraine. So I would say, so far the Russians are happy with these, let's say, 35,000 to 40,000 volunteers they are contracting every month. I mean, this is every month, so you can calculate this up. And this is like almost 500,000 volunteers to kill Ukrainians every year from the Russian side. So far, as I said, conscripts have been prepared at the same time as they have been trained to increase the pool of possible soldiers. But from my personal understanding, I would say these conscripts are being, let's say, stored or held back for an attack on NATO or for war with NATO. This is what I think, because why else would you have to train another 135,000 young men every year to become soldiers if you use only mainly contract soldiers in Ukraine. So I think Russia is still having a lot of meat here, unfortunately, voluntary meat to go to Ukraine, to kill Ukrainians, and then mostly to be killed by Ukrainians because of their decision, I would say. So in the end, I see these numbers. They worry me a lot because I think these soldiers are not being used in Ukraine. They are being used for another war. And who else would be the Russian enemy than NATO?
Julian, thank you so much for your sharp and timely analysis. Your insights continue to be available contribution to understanding the realities of the war. I need to say that today with us was Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD. I wish you all the best and see you.
Thank you very much.